Some nights stay with you forever, changing everything you thought you knew about yourself. For Jacob Frost, that night was Christmas Eve, 1882. He'd been living alone in the Colorado mountains for 15 years, cut off from the world, nursing old wounds that never seemed to heal. His cabin stood miles from the nearest town, buried in snow and silence. He wasn't expecting visitors. He wasn't expecting anything at all. Then he found her in his barn, a young pregnant woman, half frozen, barely alive. She should have died out there in that bitter cold. But when she opened her eyes and spoke, her words were so unexpected, so full of something he'd lost long ago, that everything changed. What did she say to a man who'd given up on life? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning of Christmas Eve began like any other for Jacob Frost. He woke before dawn in his rough-hewn cabin, breath misting in the cold air, despite the embers still glowing in the stone fireplace. The cabin was small, functional, built by his own hands 15 years ago when he'd first come to these mountains. One room served as everything: bedroom, kitchen, living space. A loft above held supplies and furs. The walls were chinked tight against the wind, the roof sturdy under its burden of snow. It was a place built for survival, not comfort. A place built for one. Jacob was 53 years old. Though the mountains had aged him beyond his years, his face was weathered leather, creased deep around the eyes and mouth. His beard, once dark brown, had gone mostly gray, kept trimmed close with his hunting knife. His hands were scarred and calloused, capable hands that could skin a deer, repair a roof, split wood in sub-zero temperatures. They were hands that had once held gentler things. He dressed in layers: wool union suit, heavy canvas pants, flannel shirt, leather vest. His boots were worn but well-maintained, oiled regularly against the wet and cold. Everything he owned had to earn its place. There was no room for sentiment in a life pared down to essentials. The routine never varied. Build up the fire, melt snow for water, boil coffee strong enough to strip paint, fry salt pork and yesterday's cornbread in the same iron skillet he'd used for 15 years. Eat standing up, looking out the single window at the vast wilderness that surrounded him. The Colorado Rockies stretched in every direction, peaks white against the pale winter sky. Ponderosa pine and Douglas fir blanketed the slopes, their branches heavy with snow. This high up, the air was thin and sharp, carrying the scent of wood smoke and pine resin. The nearest town, Leadville, lay 23 miles to the southeast, a hard day's journey even in good weather. Jacob hadn't been there in over a year. He preferred it that way. After breakfast, he checked his traps. The snowshoes hung by the door, ash frames and rawhide webbing, made by his own hands. He strapped them on and stepped out into a world of white silence. The snow was 3 feet deep on level ground, deeper in the drifts. The sky was gray, pregnant with more snow to come. Jacob could read weather the way some men read books. A storm was building, a bad one. He made his rounds methodically. 6 traps in a 2-mile circuit, 3 rabbits and a fox. Good enough. He reset the traps, cached the game, moved on. The physical work felt good. It always did. It kept his mind occupied, kept the memories at bay. But not completely. Never completely. There had been a time when Jacob Frost was a different man, a family man, a husband and father living in a small house in St. Louis, working as a carpenter and cabinet maker. He'd been good at his trade, known for his craftsmanship and fair prices. His wife, Catherine, had been a school teacher, gentle and well-read. Their daughter, Mary, had been bright and curious, always at Jacob's elbow when he worked, begging to learn, to help, to try. Catherine died first. Consumption, the doctors called it. Jacob watched her fade over 6 months, growing thinner and paler, coughing blood into handkerchiefs she tried to hide. She died in April when the dogwoods were blooming. Mary was 12. Jacob and Mary held on for 5 more years. He poured himself into raising her, teaching her his trade. She was gifted with wood, able to see the grain and work with it, not against it. She was going to be better than him, he'd often thought. She was going to be something special. Then the fever came. Scarlet fever, sweeping through St. Louis like wildfire. Mary fought for 3 days. Jacob never left her side. She died holding his hand, just 17 years old, her whole life unlived. After that, Jacob couldn't stay. The house was full of ghosts. The workshop held too many memories. Catherine reading while he worked, Mary learning to use a plane, both of them laughing at some private joke. He sold everything, kept only what he could carry, and headed west. He kept moving until the mountains swallowed him whole. That was 15 years ago. 15 years of silence and solitude. 15 years of trying to outrun grief. By midday, Jacob was back at the cabin. He skinned and dressed the rabbits, scraped the fox pelt and stretched it on a frame. He chopped wood, stacked it under the eaves where it would stay dry. He checked the barn, a lean-to structure 50 yards from the cabin where he kept his mule, Silas, and a milk cow named Bess. Both animals were settling in for the coming storm. He forked hay for them, checked their water. The wind was picking up, the temperature dropping. Jacob's bones ached with it, old breaks and strains that served as his own personal barometer. This was going to be a hard blow. He spent the afternoon inside, mending harness, sharpening tools, work that kept his hands busy. As the light faded, he allowed himself a luxury he usually avoided. From a trunk beneath his bunk, he pulled out a worn leather journal. It had been Catherine's gift to him on their 10th wedding anniversary. "For your thoughts," she'd written on the first page. "So we can grow old together and remember how we were young." Jacob had written in it faithfully for years. Observations about his work, stories about Mary, love letters to Catherine that she would read and tease him about. The last entry was dated 3 days after Mary's funeral. After that, blank pages. He sat by the fire, the journal unopened in his lap. He did this sometimes, on the hardest days, held it like a talisman. Never read it. Couldn't bear to read it. The words would make it all too real, too present. The loss would overwhelm him. Outside, the wind began to howl. Snow started falling, thick and fast. Jacob set the journal aside and made his evening meal. Salt pork again, beans, coffee. He ate mechanically, tasting nothing. This was Christmas Eve, he realized. He'd almost forgotten. Time had little meaning up here. Days blended together, marked only by the tasks they required. But yes, it was Christmas Eve. The thought brought no joy, only a dull ache. There had been a time when Christmas meant something. Catherine baking pies, Mary stringing popcorn for the tree, Jacob carving small wooden toys to hide under it. Laughter and warmth and love filling every corner of their home. Now there was only silence. As darkness fell complete, Jacob banked the fire and prepared for bed. The storm was raging now, wind shrieking around the cabin corners, snow battering the walls. He'd be snowed in for days, likely. He had supplies enough. He always did. Being unprepared could kill you in these mountains. He was pulling off his boots when he heard it. Faint, almost lost in the wind. But there, a sound from the barn. Jacob froze, listening. There it was again. Not Silas or Bess. Something else. Someone else. He pulled his boots back on, grabbed his rifle from above the door, and stepped out into the storm. The wind tried to tear the door from Jacob's grip as he fought his way outside. Snow lashed his face, stinging exposed skin. The cold was brutal, stealing breath from his lungs. He couldn't see more than a few feet ahead, the world reduced to swirling white chaos. He knew the way to the barn, I feel, in memory. 50 yards. 50 yards he'd walked 1,000 times. He kept one hand on the rope he'd strung between cabin and barn for exactly this reason, letting it guide him through the blinding storm. The barn loomed out of the darkness, a darker shadow against the night. Jacob pushed through the door, rifle ready, and stopped. At first, he thought it was a pile of rags dumped in the corner near Silas's stall. Then the pile moved, just slightly, and he understood. A person. Someone had collapsed in his barn. Jacob set the rifle aside and moved closer, kneeling in the straw. The figure was small, curled tight, covered in snow that was melting now in the relative warmth of the barn. He brushed snow away from what he thought was the head and found a face. A woman's face, young, her skin pale as death, lips blue. She wasn't moving, wasn't breathing that he could see. Jacob pulled off his glove and pressed 2 fingers to her throat, searching for a pulse. There. Faint, slow, but there. She was alive, barely. He made a quick assessment. She was dressed for travel, but not for a blizzard. A wool coat soaked through. Thin boots, no hat, no gloves. Her dark hair was frozen in places, crusted with ice. And she was pregnant. Very pregnant. Her belly was swollen beneath the inadequate coat. Hypothermia. Advanced. She needed warmth immediately or she'd be dead within the hour. Jacob didn't think. Didn't debate. He scooped her up. She weighed almost nothing and carried her back through the storm to the cabin. The journey back was harder, fighting the wind with his burden. But he made it, kicked the door shut behind him, and laid her on his bunk near the fire. He worked quickly, efficiently, stripped off her wet clothes with clinical detachment, wrapped her in every blanket he owned, built up the fire until it roared. Her skin was ice cold, especially her hands and feet. Frostbite was a real possibility. He filled a basin with lukewarm water, not hot, that could kill her as surely as the cold, and carefully immersed her hands and feet. She didn't respond, didn't move. Her breathing was so shallow he had to watch closely to see her chest rise and fall. Jacob had seen hypothermia before, had treated it in himself once, years ago after falling through ice. He knew the dangers, knew that warming someone too quickly could stop their heart, knew that even if he did everything right, she might still die. He heated stones in the fire, wrapped them in cloth, and placed them carefully around her body. Core temperature first, extremities later. He made weak broth from dried beef and tried to get some between her lips. Most of it ran down her chin, but a little went down. That was something. Hours passed. Jacob sat beside the bunk, monitoring her breathing, adjusting blankets, replacing cooled stones with warm ones. The storm raged outside, shaking the cabin. Inside, firelight flickered across the woman's still face. She was young, maybe 25, maybe younger, pretty in a delicate way that seemed at odds with these harsh mountains. Her hands, when he examined them, were rough with recent work, but showed signs of former gentility. There was a ring on her left hand, a simple gold wedding band, worn thin, a widow then, or a wife separated from her husband. Either way, what was she doing out here? Where had she come from? Where was she going? The questions tumbled through Jacob's mind, but there were no answers. Only this fragile life he was trying to preserve. Around midnight, she began to shiver. Violent tremors that shook her, whole body. Jacob knew this was good, actually. It meant her body was trying to warm itself. He piled on more blankets, held warm stones closer, talked to her in a low, steady voice. Come on now, you've made it this far. Don't quit on me. Whatever you're running from, whatever brought you out into that storm, you survived it. You're alive. Stay alive. He didn't know why he was talking to her. He hadn't spoken this many words in months, maybe years. But the sound of his own voice seemed important somehow, a tether to pull her back from wherever she was drifting. The shivering gradually subsided. Her breathing deepened, became more regular. Color, just a hint, returned to her cheeks. Jacob allowed himself a small measure of hope. Around 3 in the morning, her eyes opened. They were gray, he noticed, gray like the winter sky. They focused on him slowly, confused, frightened. "You're safe," Jacob said, his voice rough from disuse. "You're in my cabin. I found you in the barn. You were near frozen." She stared at him, trying to process. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. "Don't try to talk yet," Jacob said. "Just rest. You're going to be all right." But she kept trying, her face urgent. Finally, barely more than a whisper, the words came. "I prayed someone good would find me." The simple statement hit Jacob like a physical blow. Prayed someone good, as if there was a God listening, as if goodness still existed in the world, as if Jacob Frost, bitter hermit hiding from life, could be the answer to anyone's prayer. He opened his mouth to respond, but she'd already slipped back into unconsciousness. Not the deathly stillness of before, but sleep, exhausted, healing sleep. Jacob sat back, shaken. Her words echoed in his mind. "I prayed someone good would find me." When was the last time someone had called him good? When was the last time he'd thought of himself that way? He'd spent 15 years believing he was nothing, that his life had ended when his family died, that he was just marking time until death claimed him too. But this woman, this stranger, had prayed, and somehow, impossibly, she'd ended up in his barn, in his care. He looked at her lying there, her pregnant belly rising and falling with each breath. 2 lives depending on him now. Maybe 3 if you counted his own, which he hadn't in a very long time. The weight of it settled on his shoulders. The responsibility, the risk. If he kept her here, he'd have to care for her, feed her, protect her, deliver her baby most likely, because there was no way to get her to a town in this weather. And after? What then? The safe thing, the smart thing, would be to get her out as soon as the storm passed. Send her on her way to wherever she was headed. Return to his solitude. But even as he thought it, he knew he wouldn't. Couldn't. She'd said she prayed someone good would find her. Maybe, just maybe, there was still something good left in him. Something worth saving. And maybe the thought was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Maybe saving her would somehow save him too. Dawn came gray and bitter. The storm showed no signs of abating. Jacob hadn't slept. He sat by the bunk, keeping watch, feeding the fire, checking her pulse and breathing every few minutes. She slept on, her body fighting to recover from its brush with death. The baby moved occasionally, a ripple across her belly that fascinated and frightened Jacob. New life, struggling to be born. Life that would die if he failed. He thought about the journal under his bunk, the blank pages after Mary's death. He'd stopped writing because he'd stopped living, just existed, just endured. Maybe that was about to change. The woman stirred, murmured something he couldn't make out. Her hand moved to her belly, instinctively protective even in sleep. The wedding ring caught the firelight, a small circle of gold against her pale skin. Someone had loved her, had married her, put that ring on her finger, made promises. Where was that person now? Dead, probably, given the ring and her circumstances. Another widow, another soul marked by loss. They had that in common, at least. Jacob stood, stretched muscles stiff from hours of sitting. He needed to check the animals, tend to his own needs, but he was reluctant to leave her, even for a few minutes. What if she woke? What if she needed something? He compromised, making a quick trip to the barn and back. Silas and Bess were fine, settled and warm. The woman in the barn corner had left a small bundle behind, he realized. He grabbed it and fought his way back to the cabin. Inside, she was still sleeping. He set the bundle on the table and opened it carefully. A few changes of clothes, worn and mended, a small amount of money, a tin-type photograph of a young man in mining clothes, and tucked at the bottom, wrapped in cloth, a small carved wooden horse. Jacob picked it up, turning it over in his scarred hands. The craftsmanship was simple but sincere, made with love if not skill. A toy for the baby. Made by the man in the photograph, most likely. Made by a father who would never see his child. The weight of her loss, combined with his own, was almost overwhelming. Two people thrown together by tragedy and circumstance, carrying grief like stones in their pockets. But she'd prayed, and Jacob had found her. And maybe, in the mathematics of providence, that meant something. He set the wooden horse on the mantel where she could see it when she woke. A reminder that she wasn't alone, that someone cared about her survival, that even in the depths of winter, in the heart of darkness, there could still be light. Outside, the storm howled on. Inside, two broken people sheltered together, and something that might have been hope began to take root. The third day dawned clear and cold, the sky a brilliant blue that hurt to look at. Sarah was strong enough now to walk around the cabin, though she tired, easily. Jacob watched her move, noting the way she placed a hand on the small of her back, the slight waddle of her gait. The baby was big, due soon. The thought both terrified and compelled him. After breakfast, Sarah did something that surprised him. She started tidying the cabin. Not cleaning, it was already clean, Jacob kept it that way, but arranging, making small changes that softened the harsh functionality of the space. "You don't have to do that," Jacob said. "I need to do something. I can't just sit and be waited on. You're recovering. I'm recovered enough, and I need to feel useful." She paused, looking around. "This is a good cabin, Jacob. Solid, well built, but it feels like a place you're camping, not living. I live here. You survive here. That's different." Jacob wanted to argue, but he couldn't. She was right. This wasn't a home. It was a shelter, a place to exist, nothing more. Sarah moved to the window, looked out at the snow-covered landscape. "It's beautiful here, peaceful. I can see why you chose it." "I didn't choose it to be beautiful. I chose it to be away." "Away from what?" "Everything. Everyone. Memories." Sarah turned to face him. "Does it work? Can you really escape memories?" "No," Jacob admitted. "They follow you wherever you go." "Then why stay away? Why not go back to where the memories are good ones too, not just painful?" Jacob had no answer for that. Or rather, he had answers, but they felt flimsy now, examined in the light of Sarah's gentle questioning. She moved around the cabin, touching things lightly, the cook stove, the table, the chairs Jacob had made himself. "You're a craftsman," she observed. "These are well made. I was a carpenter before. What happened to your tools? Your workshop?" "Sold them, sold everything." "Do you miss it? The work?" Jacob thought about it. "I did, at first. Now I barely remember it." "I don't believe that. You don't forget skills like that. They're in your hands, your muscles. You could still do it. No point up here. No point in a lot of things, if that's how you measure." Sarah's voice was soft but firm. There doesn't always have to be a point. Sometimes doing something because it brings you joy is reason enough. Jacob turned away, uncomfortable. She was pushing at walls he'd built carefully, deliberately. Walls that protected him from feeling too much, wanting too much, hoping too much. But Sarah seemed to understand when to push and when to retreat. She changed the subject. "Tell me about them, your wife and daughter, if you want to." "Why would you want to hear about them?" "Because they made you who you are, because they mattered. Because I think it might help you to talk about them." Jacob was silent for a long moment. Then, surprising himself, he began to speak. Catherine was a schoolteacher. Smart, gentle. She loved books, loved learning. She'd read to anyone who'd listen. Me, Mary, the neighbors. She had this way of making even the dullest subject interesting. She sounds wonderful. She was. Too good for me, honestly. I never understood why she married a carpenter when she could have had anyone. Maybe because you were a good man who loved her. Jacob continued, the words coming easier now. Mary was bright like her mother, curious about everything, always asking questions. Why is the sky blue? Why do birds sing? Where does the rain come from? He smiled at the memory. Drove Catherine mad sometimes, but in a good way. How old was she when she died? 17, just about to turn 18. She was going to apprentice with a furniture maker in St. Louis. She was better than me already, had a real gift for it. I'm so sorry, Jacob. He went to the trunk, pulled out something he'd kept even when he'd sold everything else. A tintype photograph, carefully preserved. He handed it to Sarah. She studied it with care. The image showed a younger Jacob, clean-shaven and hopeful-looking, standing behind a seated woman. Catherine was beautiful in a quiet way, with kind eyes and a gentle smile. Beside her stood a teenage girl, Mary, her hand resting on her mother's shoulder. The resemblance was clear. Same eyes, same smile. They're lovely, Sarah said softly. You can see the love between you. It's in the way they're positioned, the way they're looking at you behind the camera. That was taken 2 years before Catherine died. One of the last good times we had all together. Sarah traced the outline of Mary's face with one finger. She looks like she was full of life. She was, right up until the end. Jacob's voice caught. She fought so hard, 3 days of fever, delirious most of the time, but there were moments when she was herself. She'd look at me and try to smile, try to tell me she was all right. Even dying, she was trying to take care of me. Tears ran freely down Jacob's face now. He didn't try to hide them. Sarah set the photograph down carefully and came to him, placed a hand on his arm. You've been carrying this alone for too long, she said. I didn't know how to let it go, didn't even know if I should. It felt like betraying them, like if I stopped hurting, I'd stop remembering. Pain isn't the only way to remember. You can remember the joy too, the love, the good times. Can you, with Thomas? Sarah considered. I'm learning to. It's hard. The loss is so fresh, but I try to think about his laugh, his kindness, the way he'd come home dirty from the mine and still want to hold me. Those memories don't hurt less exactly, but they feel warmer, more like a gift than a wound. They stood together in the quiet cabin, two people who understood loss in ways most couldn't. The silence between them was comfortable, companionable. Finally, Sarah spoke again. Can I ask you something? Why did you keep the photograph if you put everything else away? Jacob looked at the image again. I don't know. Maybe because I couldn't let go, completely. Maybe because I needed proof it was real, that they existed, that I wasn't always this empty shell of a person. You're not empty, Jacob. You're hurting. That's different. Is it? Yes. Empty means there's nothing left, but you're full. Full of love you don't know how to express anymore. Full of grief you haven't processed. Full of memories you're afraid to face. That's not empty. That's overwhelmed. Jacob sat down heavily. When did you get so wise? Loss either breaks you or teaches you. I'm trying to let it teach me. Sarah picked up the photograph again, studied it more carefully. Would you tell me about them? Really tell me. Not just the sad parts, but the good parts too. So Jacob did. For the first time in 15 years, he talked about his family. Not about their deaths, but about their lives. He told Sarah about Catherine's terrible singing voice that she used anyway. About Mary's habit of collecting rocks and stashing them in her pockets until her skirts hung heavy. about Sunday dinners and lazy summer evenings and Christmas mornings. He told her about the ordinary, beautiful moments that made up a life together, the things he'd forgotten in his focus on loss, the joy that had existed before the pain. Sarah listened, laughed at the funny parts, teared up at the touching ones. And slowly, Jacob felt something shift inside him. The memories stopped feeling like weapons and started feeling like treasures, things to be cherished, not hidden away. That evening, he placed the photograph on the mantel beside the Bible and the carved horse. 3 symbols now, 3 reminders that love, once given, never truly dies. It changes form, becomes memory, but it endures. Sarah stood beside him, looking at the mantel display. "That's better," she said. "That looks like a home now." And Jacob, looking at the small collection of meaningful objects, realized she was right. For the first time in 15 years, this cabin felt like more than just a place to survive. It felt like a place where life could happen, where healing could begin, where 2 broken people could help each other remember what it meant to be whole. The 4th day brought more snow, but lighter this time. A steady fall that muffled sound and made the world feel smaller, more intimate. Sarah woke early, complaining of backache and restlessness. Jacob helped her walk around the cabin, knowing movement would ease the discomfort. "How far along are you?" he asked. 8 months, maybe a bit more. It's hard to say exactly. She rubbed her belly absently. "The baby's been quiet today. Usually he kicks all the time." Jacob felt a flutter of concern. "Is that normal?" "I think so. My neighbor back in Fairplay, she had 6 children. She said they quiet down right before they come." "Getting ready." The implications of that settled over Jacob like a weight. The baby would come soon, here in this isolated cabin with only him to help. He had no experience with childbirth beyond being present when Mary was born, and that had been 20-some years ago with a midwife and doctor in attendance. Sarah seemed to read his thoughts. "You're worried. You should have proper care, a midwife, a doctor. There's no one else." "It'll be all right, Jacob. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. We'll manage. What if something goes wrong? Then we deal with it. But worrying won't change anything." She touched his arm. "I trust you. You saved my life already. I believe you can help me bring this baby into the world." Her faith in him was terrifying, but also strengthening. Someone believed in him, trusted him. That meant something. To distract himself from the worry, Jacob decided to tackle a project he'd been avoiding. The baby would need somewhere to sleep, somewhere safe and warm. A cradle. He went to the loft and pulled down tools he hadn't touched in years. Saws, planes, chisels, all wrapped carefully in oiled cloth. They'd been Mary's tools, meant for her apprenticeship that never happened. He'd carried them all the way to Colorado, unable to part with them even when he'd sold everything else. Sarah watched as he laid them out on the table. "Those are beautiful tools. They were my daughter's. I gave them to her for her 16th birthday." He picked up a chisel, tested the edge. Still sharp. "She took such good care of them, better than I ever did with mine." "What are you going to make?" "A cradle. For the baby." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Jacob, you don't have to do that." "Yes, I do. Can't have the child sleeping in a drawer or a basket." He began sorting through wood he had stored, rough planks he'd cut for repairs but never used. "Besides, I want to. Haven't made anything in years. Feels right to start with this." He spent the rest of the morning measuring, planning, sketching rough designs on a scrap of paper. Sarah watched, occasionally offering suggestions. It felt good to be creating something again, to use skills he'd thought dead in him. By afternoon, he was cutting wood, the rhythmic sound of the saw filling the cabin. Sarah sat nearby, sanding pieces he'd already cut, making them smooth. They worked in comfortable silence, the way people do when they're at ease with each other. "Why did you stop?" Sarah asked eventually. "Making things?" Jacob paused, considered. "After Mary died, I couldn't bear to touch the tools. They reminded me too much of her, of what she'd never become. So I packed them away." "But you brought them with you." "I couldn't leave them behind. It would have felt like abandoning her." He ran his hand over a plank, feeling the grain. Wood was her first love. Before boys, before anything else. She'd spend hours in the workshop, just learning to read the grain, understanding how wood wants to be shaped. She sounds like she had a real calling. She did. She would have been a master craftsman, better than me, better than anyone. I knew. Jacob's voice was thick with old grief. That's what hurts most sometimes. Not just that she died, but that all her potential died with her. All the beautiful things she would have made, all the joy she would have brought to the world. Gone. Sarah was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Maybe making this cradle is a way of honoring that. Using her tools to create something beautiful. Something that will bring joy." Jacob looked at the pieces taking shape under his hands. "I hadn't thought of it that way. She'd want you to use them, to keep creating, not to let the tools sit unused forever." "You're right." Jacob picked up a piece, examined it critically. "She'd be angry at me, actually. Letting good tools gather dust. That was a sin in her book." They worked through the afternoon. Jacob's hands remembered the motions, the angles, the pressure needed. It was like coming home after a long journey. The tools felt right in his grip. The wood responded to his touch. He found himself smiling, actually smiling as a joint fit together perfectly. Sarah helped where she could, though she tired easily. She held pieces steady while Jacob worked, handed him tools, offered encouragement. Her presence made the work better somehow, made it feel less like a solitary task and more like a collaboration. As evening approached, the basic frame of the cradle was complete. It still needed sanding, finishing, but the shape was there, strong and simple, made to rock gently. "It's beautiful," Sarah said, running her hand along the smooth wood. "It's functional. Still needs work." "No, Jacob. It's beautiful. You can see the care in every joint, every cut. This is more than just a place for a baby to sleep. It's a work of love." Jacob felt heat in his face. He wasn't used to praise, to someone seeing value in what he created. "I'm glad you like it." Thomas would have loved to make something like this, but he wasn't skilled with his hands, not for woodworking. He tried, though. That little horse took him weeks. She smiled at the memory. He'd come home with splinters in his fingers, frustrated, but he kept at it. Because it mattered. Because it was for our child. The horse is good work. Made with love, like you said. That's what matters most. They sat together as darkness fell, looking at the half-finished cradle. Two people from different lives, brought together by circumstance and loss, creating something new, something hopeful. Jacob realized he was happy. Actually, genuinely happy. It had been so long since he'd felt this way that he almost didn't recognize the emotion. But there it was. A warmth in his chest, a lightness in his spirit. Purpose, connection, hope. He looked at Sarah, her hand resting on her belly, her face peaceful in the firelight. She'd been right earlier. They weren't empty. They were full. Of love, of grief, of memory, of possibility. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to build a life on. Maybe it was time to stop surviving and start living again. The fifth day dawned with Jacob putting the finishing touches on the cradle. He'd worked late into the previous night, unable to stop once he'd started. The piece had come together beautifully, each joint tight, the rockers smooth and balanced. He'd even carved a simple design into the headboard, a pine tree representing these mountains that had sheltered them both. Sarah watched him work, but he noticed she was distracted. Her eyes kept drifting to the window, her body tensing at every sound from outside. When the wind rattled the shutters, she actually jumped. "What's wrong?" Jacob asked, setting down his sandpaper. "Nothing, I'm fine." "You're not fine. You've been nervous all morning." Sarah looked away, worrying the wedding ring on her finger. "It's probably nothing." "If it's bothering you, it's not nothing." She was quiet for a long moment. Then, in a rush, she said, "I haven't told you everything. About why I was out there, about what happened after Thomas died." Jacob set aside the cradle and gave her his full attention. "I'm listening." The story came out slowly, painfully. Thomas hadn't just been a miner. He and his partner, Robert Hendricks, had struck a rich vein of silver, worth thousands, maybe more. They'd been planning to register the claim, split it fairly, when Thomas died in that cave-in. After the funeral, Robert came to see me, said he wanted to help, said he'd buy out my half of the claim, give me enough money to get to Denver, start fresh. Sarah's voice shook. I said no. The claim was Thomas's legacy, all I had left of him. I wanted to work it myself, hire people, keep what Thomas had built. What did Hendricks say to that? He got angry. Said a woman couldn't run a mining operation. Said I was being foolish. Then he left, and I thought that was the end of it. Sarah wrapped her arms around herself. But he came back 2 nights later. He'd been drinking. He tried to force himself on me, said if I wouldn't sell the claim, he'd take it another way, by marrying me. Jacob felt cold fury building in his chest. What happened? I fought him, grabbed the fire poker and hit him. He fell, struck his head on the corner of the table. There was so much blood. Sarah was crying now. I thought I'd killed him. I was terrified. I ran to get help, but when I came back with the sheriff, Robert was gone, just a bloodstain on the floor. He survived then. Yes, but when the sheriff found him the next day, Robert claimed I'd attacked him unprovoked. Said I'd tried to kill him to steal the claim for myself. His brother backed up the story. Said Robert had told him he was afraid of me, that I'd threatened him before. The sheriff believed them? Robert's family has money, influence. I'm just a pregnant widow. Who would believe me? Sarah's voice was bitter. They put out a warrant for my arrest. Attempted murder. The judge was going to hold me over for trial, but I knew I wouldn't get a fair hearing. So I ran. That's why you were traveling in winter, why you were alone. I was going to Denver, to my sister. I thought if I could get out of Fair Play's jurisdiction, I'd have a chance. But the storm hit, and my guide abandoned me, and I thought I was going to die out there. She looked at Jacob. I'm sorry I didn't tell you before. I didn't want to put you in danger. Danger from who? Robert won't let this go. The claim is worth too much. He'll come looking for me, or send men to find me. And if they find me here, with you, you could be charged with harboring a fugitive. Jacob stood, began pacing. Did you try to kill him? No, I was defending myself. He attacked me first. I believe you. Sarah looked up, surprised. You do? I've seen enough of the world to know that money and power can twist the truth. And I know you, Sarah. You're not a murderer. You've known me less than a week. I know what matters. I know your character. Jacob stopped pacing, looked at her directly. The question is, what do we do about it? Before Sarah could answer, there was a sound outside. Horses. Multiple horses. Jacob moved to the window, carefully peered out. 3 men on horseback, approaching the cabin. They looked hard, professional, not lawmen, something worse. Bounty hunters. Get in the root cellar, Jacob said quietly. Now. Jacob, no, I won't let you. Now, Sarah. Please. She must have heard the urgency in his voice because she moved quickly, lowering herself into the small root cellar Jacob had shown her days ago. He covered the entrance with the rug and furniture, making it as invisible as possible. Then he grabbed his rifle, checked that it was loaded, and stepped outside to meet the men. They reined in their horses a few yards from the cabin. The leader, a hard-faced man with a scar running down his left cheek, smiled without warmth. "Morning," he said. "We're looking for someone. A woman, pregnant, goes by Sarah Brennan." "Don't know anyone by that name," Jacob said evenly. "She might not have given her real name. Might have claimed to be lost, in trouble. She's wanted for attempted murder down in Fairplay. There's a reward for her return." The man pulled a folded paper from his coat, tossed it to Jacob. A wanted poster. Sarah's face, drawn from description, and the words, "Wanted for attempted murder of Robert Hendricks. Reward, $500. Jacob handed the poster back. "Like I said, I don't know anyone by that name. Haven't seen anyone. I'm alone up here." "You mind if we search your cabin? Just to be sure." "Yes, I mind. This is private property." The scar-faced man's smile disappeared. "We're not asking for trouble, old man. Just doing a job. And I'm just protecting my home. Nobody searches it without my permission." One of the other men, younger and cocky, laughed. "What are you going to do? Shoot us? There's 3 of us, and one of you—" Jacob leveled the rifle. "I'm going to do what I have to do to protect what's mine. You can ride out of here peacefully, or you can find out if an old man still knows how to use a rifle. Your choice." The leader held up a hand, stopping the younger man from drawing his weapon. "Easy now. No need for violence. We're just trying to earn an honest living. There's nothing honest about hunting a pregnant woman for money. She's a criminal, tried to kill a man. That's for a court to decide, not bounty hunters." The men exchanged glances. Jacob could see them calculating odds, weighing options, 3 armed men against 1, but Jacob had the high ground, the cover of the cabin, and most importantly, the look of a man with nothing left to lose. The leader must have seen that in Jacob's eyes, because he nodded slowly. "All right, we'll go. But we'll be watching. If she's here, we'll know. And we'll be back. You do that." The men turned their horses and rode off, but slowly, making a point. Jacob watched until they disappeared into the trees, then waited 10 more minutes before calling Sarah out. She emerged, shaking, tears streaming down her face. "They know I'm here. They'll come back. Maybe, but not today. Jacob, you should turn me in. I won't let you risk yourself for me." "That's not your decision to make." Jacob set the rifle aside, took her shoulders gently. "I told you that you're not alone anymore. I meant it. Why? Why would you do this for me?" Jacob thought about it. About 15 years of isolation. About choosing death over life, emptiness over connection. About a broken woman in his barn and the simple prayer that had brought them together. "Because you were right," he said finally. "I've been dead for 15 years. You gave me a reason to live. I'm not giving that up. I'm not giving you up. They'll kill you. They'll try, but I've got something they don't." "What's that?" "I've got something worth fighting for." Jacob looked at her, this woman who'd stumbled into his life and changed everything. "You asked me once if my family would be proud of me. Maybe they would, maybe they wouldn't. But I want to be proud of myself again, and that means standing up for what's right, protecting someone who needs protecting, being the man I used to be before grief turned me into a coward." Sarah threw her arms around him, sobbing. Jacob held her awkwardly at first, then with more confidence. It had been so long since he'd comforted someone, since he'd been needed this way. "We'll figure this out," he said. "Together, but first, we need to prepare. They'll be back, probably with more men. The next time, they won't leave peacefully." That night, they made plans. Jacob checked his ammunition, cleaned his weapons. Sarah told him everything she knew about Robert Hendricks and his family, their resources, their likely tactics. They were in this together now, for better or worse. As Jacob lay in his pallet by the fire, unable to sleep, he realized something. For the first time since Mary died, he felt alive, truly alive. The fear, the danger, the responsibility, it all mattered. Sarah mattered. Her baby mattered. And he was going to make sure they survived. Whatever it took, he'd come back to life. And he wasn't going to waste this second chance. The sixth day brought a deceptive peace. The sky was clear, the air crystalline. But Jacob knew it was the calm before the storm. He'd seen how the bounty hunters looked at his cabin, calculating, planning. They'd be back. The only question was when. He spent the morning preparing. First, he showed Sarah the root cellar again, made sure she could get in and out quickly. Then he positioned supplies there, water, food, blankets, the medical kit he'd assembled over the years. If shooting started, she'd need to stay hidden and safe. "I hate this," Sarah said, watching him work. "Hiding while you fight. Your job is to survive, to keep that baby safe. That's the most important thing. And what about you?" "I'll be fine. I know this terrain. I know every approach to this cabin." They don't. But Sarah wasn't convinced. "Jacob, there were 3 of them. There might be more next time. I've faced worse odds." "When?" "You were a carpenter, not a soldier." Jacob paused, realizing he'd never told her about that part of his life. "Before I was a carpenter, I was other things. Fought in the war, briefly. Learned how to handle myself. I'm not helpless, Sarah. I never thought you were helpless. I just don't want you to die for me. I'm not planning to die." He looked at her seriously. "But I am planning to fight. These men are coming for you, and I won't let them take you. Not while I'm breathing." He went to the loft and brought down something he hadn't touched in years. A long wooden case, carefully wrapped. Inside was his old rifle, a Henry repeating rifle he'd carried during the war and kept after. He'd maintained it over the years, more from habit than expectation of use. Now he was grateful for that discipline. The rifle was a beautiful piece of machinery, brass receiver gleaming even after all these years. The lever action smooth and reliable. Jacob checked it thoroughly, loaded it with practiced movements. 15 rounds. More than enough if he didn't waste shots. Sarah watched, her face pale. "You're really going to do this?" "I am." "Then teach me." Jacob looked at her sharply. "What?" "Teach me to shoot. I should know how in case something happens to you, in case I need to protect myself and the baby. You're in no condition. I'm pregnant, not helpless. And I need to know I can defend myself. Please, Jacob." He considered, then nodded. "All right, but we start with basics, and you stay in the cabin no matter what happens outside. Agreed?" Agreed. He spent the next hour teaching her to handle a pistol he kept, a Colt revolver, simpler than the rifle, showed her how to load it, aim it, fire it. She was a quick study, her hands steady despite her fear. They practiced dry firing inside, then went out back where he set up targets and let her fire a few rounds. The shots echoed across the valley, sharp cracks that disturbed the winter silence. Sarah flinched at the noise but kept practicing. By the end, she could hit a target at 10 yards more often than not. "Good," Jacob said. "That's good enough for close range. Remember, you're not trying to be a marksman. You're just trying to stop someone from hurting you." They went back inside, and Jacob continued his preparations. He secured the windows, creating small loopholes he could fire through. He positioned furniture to provide cover. He filled buckets with water in case of fire. Every detail mattered. Sarah helped where she could, but he could see she was tiring. The stress, the fear, the physical demands of late pregnancy, all of it was wearing on her. That evening, he made her rest while he kept watch. As darkness fell, he sat by the window, rifle across his lap, watching the tree line. The mountains were quiet, snow-covered, peaceful. But Jacob knew that peace was fragile. could shatter at any moment. He thought about the life he'd built here. 15 years of solitude and silence. He'd convinced himself it was enough, that survival was sufficient. But Sarah had shown him it wasn't. Life was meant for more than just existing. It was meant for connection, for purpose, for fighting for things that mattered. Around midnight, Jacob saw them, shadows moving through the trees, 3 dark shapes against the snow. They were on foot this time, approaching carefully. Smart. Horses would have given them away sooner. "Sarah," he called softly. "They're here. Get in the cellar." She moved quickly, climbing down into the hidden space. Jacob covered the entrance and took his position by the window. His heart was pounding, but his hands were steady. He'd been afraid during the war, but he'd learned to function through fear, to let training and instinct take over. The shadows came closer. Jacob could make out details now. 3 men, as before. The scar-faced leader, the cocky young one, and a third man Jacob hadn't gotten a good look at before. Older, heavier, moving with the careful deliberation of someone who'd done this before. They split up, approaching from different angles. Professional, coordinated. These weren't amateurs stumbling around in the dark. Jacob waited, patient. Let them come closer. Every yard they advanced was one less yard he'd have to shoot accurately. When they were 50 yards out, the leader called out, "Frost, we know she's in there. Send her out and we'll leave you be." Jacob didn't respond. Speech would give away his exact position. "We don't want trouble with you, old man. This isn't your fight." Still, Jacob waited. He could see the younger man circling toward the barn. The third man was moving to flank the cabin from the other side. Classic tactics. Divide attention, attack from multiple angles. "Last chance, Frost. We're coming in." Jacob made his decision. If he let them get to the cabin, they'd have too many angles of attack. Better to take the initiative. He aimed carefully at the leader, tracking him through the crude sight. Then he shifted his aim slightly, firing into the snow a few feet in front of the man. The shot cracked across the night. The leader dove for cover behind a tree. "That's your warning," Jacob shouted. "Next one won't miss. Turn around and ride out." The response was a gunshot that splintered the window frame inches from Jacob's head. He ducked, moved to another window. The younger man was firing from the barn. The third man was advancing on the cabin's blind side. This was it. No more warnings, no more chances. Jacob fired at the muzzle flash from the barn, heard a cry of pain. Hit, but not a killing shot. The young man scrambled deeper into cover. The leader was moving now, using trees for cover, working his way closer. Jacob tracked him, waited for a clear shot. There, the man stepped out to run to the next tree. Jacob fired, saw the man stumble, go down. But the third man had reached the cabin. Jacob heard him on the porch, trying the door. It was barred, but the man was kicking at it, the wood shuddering with each impact. Jacob moved to the door, rifle ready. If the man broke through, he'd have a clear shot. But then the porch went quiet. Too quiet. Jacob realized the mistake a second too late. The man wasn't trying to break down the door anymore. He was at the window, the one Jacob had been firing from earlier. Glass shattered. A gun barrel pushed through. Jacob dove as the shot rang out, felt the bullet tear through his shoulder. Pain exploded, white-hot and consuming, but he rolled, brought his rifle up, fired through the window blind. The man outside screamed, fell away from the window. Jacob tried to stand, but his left arm wouldn't work. Blood was spreading across his shirt, hot and wet. The shoulder wound was bad, but not immediately fatal. He could still fight, had to fight. He grabbed the rifle one-handed, awkward but possible, and checked the other windows. The leader was still down, not moving. The younger man was limping away, heading for the trees, done with this fight. The third man was on the porch, groaning, clutching his leg. Jacob moved to the door, unbarred it, stepped out. The man on the porch looked up, fear in his eyes. Don't shoot, please. Jacob kept the rifle trained on him. Where's the leader? Dead, I think. You hit him good. How many more are coming? No more. Just us 3. Hendricks hired us special. Please, I need a doctor. Jacob made a decision. You'll live if you do what I say. Stay there. Don't move. He went back inside, called down to Sarah. It's over. You can come out. She emerged, saw the blood, went pale. You're shot. It's not as bad as it looks. A lie, but a necessary one. I need you to help me with something. Together, they tied up the wounded man on the porch. Jacob's vision was starting to blur from blood loss, but he forced himself to focus. Sarah packed his wound with cloth, wrapped it tight. The pressure helped. Some. You need proper medical attention, she said, her voice shaking. We both do. But first we need to secure things here. They checked the other 2 men. The leader was dead, just as the 3rd man had said. Jacob felt nothing about that. The man had come to take Sarah, to drag a pregnant woman back to face false charges. He'd made his choice. The younger man had fled into the night, wounded but alive. Let him go. He'd spread the word that Jacob Frost wasn't to be trifled with. As dawn approached, Jacob sat by the fire, Sarah tending his wound properly now. The pain was intense, but he'd felt worse. He'd survived. They'd survived. They'll send someone else, Sarah said quietly. Maybe, but not soon. And maybe we buy enough time to find another solution. What solution? I don't know yet, but we'll find one. Jacob looked at her, this woman worth fighting for. We're in this together now. Whatever comes next, we face it together. Sarah took his good hand, squeezed it. Thank you, Jacob, for everything. Thank you for giving me something worth fighting for. Outside, the mountains stood silent witness to the night's violence. Inside, 2 people held on to each other and to hope, battered but unbroken, ready to face whatever tomorrow might bring. Jacob woke to Sarah's cry of pain. It was the middle of the night, 3 days after the shooting. His shoulder throbbed, but the fever had broken. He sat up quickly, ignoring the protest from his wounded arm. Sarah. She was on the floor beside the bunk, one hand braced against the bed frame, the other on her belly. The baby, she gasped. It's coming. Jacob was on his feet instantly, his own pain forgotten. Are you sure? The pain started an hour ago. I thought they'd pass, but they're getting stronger, closer together. She looked up at him, fear naked on her face. Jacob, I'm scared. I know, but we can do this. He helped her back onto the bunk, his mind racing through everything he knew about childbirth. It wasn't much, but it would have to be enough. He built up the fire until the cabin was warm, boiled water, gathered clean cloths, made sure the cradle was ready, positioned near the fire where it would be warm. His movements were automatic, driven by need rather than knowledge. Sarah's labor progressed through the night. Jacob stayed by her side, wiping her forehead with cool cloths, helping her walk when she needed to move, holding her hand through the contractions. She was strong, stoic, but he could see the toll it was taking. Tell me about them, Sarah said during a brief respite between pains. Your wife and daughter. Tell me about when Mary was born. Jacob understood. She was trying to distract herself, to find comfort in his experience. Catherine was in labor for 18 hours. Longest 18 hours of my life. I was terrified something would go wrong. But it didn't. No. Mary came into the world screaming, healthy and perfect. The midwife put her in my arms and I just stared at her. Couldn't believe something so small, so fragile, was mine to protect. Did you feel ready? Not at all. I was 23 years old and had no idea what I was doing, but Catherine said that was normal, that nobody really knows how to be a parent until they are one. Another contraction hit. Sarah gripped his hand so hard he thought bones might break. He talked her through it, counting breaths, reminding her to relax between the pains. Hours passed. Dawn came gray and cold. Sarah's strength was flagging, her face pale and drawn. Jacob's own exhaustion was catching up to him, his wounded shoulder a constant throb. But he couldn't stop. Wouldn't stop. "I can't do this," Sarah gasped. "It's too much. I can't." "Yes, you can. You're the strongest person I've met. You survived a blizzard. You survived losing Thomas. You can survive this." "What if something goes wrong? What if the baby doesn't make it? What if I don't make it?" "Don't think like that. Focus on right now, one breath, one contraction at a time." The morning wore on. The contractions were constant now, overwhelming. Sarah was beyond exhaustion, operating on pure instinct and will. Jacob supported her, encouraged her, refused to let her give up. "I need to push," Sarah said suddenly. "Jacob, I need to push now." "Then push. I'm here. I've got you." What followed was the most terrifying and miraculous thing Jacob had ever witnessed. Sarah pushed with everything she had left, her face contorted with effort and pain. Jacob guided her, helped position her, did everything he could think of to ease the process, and then, impossibly, there was a head, tiny, dark-haired, emerging into his waiting hands. "One more push," Jacob said, his voice shaking. "Just one more." Sarah pushed, screaming with the effort, and suddenly the baby slid free. Into Jacob's hands, a whole, complete, perfect human being. For a moment, the baby didn't move, didn't breathe. Panic seized Jacob. He cleared the infant's mouth with his finger, turned the tiny body over, patted the back. Nothing. "Jacob." Sarah's voice was terrified. He kept working, desperate, remembering something the midwife had done when Mary was born. He rubbed the baby's chest, stimulating, pleading silently for a response. Then, like a miracle, the baby gasped, drew breath, and began to cry. The sound was the most beautiful thing Jacob had ever heard. "It's a girl," he said, his voice breaking. "Sarah, you have a daughter." He placed the baby on Sarah's chest and watched as the new mother wrapped her arms around her child. Both of them crying, both of them alive. Against all odds, against all the ways this could have gone wrong, they'd made it. Jacob delivered the afterbirth, cleaned both mother and child, wrapped the baby in soft cloth he'd prepared. His hands were shaking, his whole body trembling with exhaustion and relief and overwhelming emotion. Sarah looked at him, her face radiant despite the exhaustion. "You did it. You saved us both. You did it. All I did was catch. No, you gave me the strength to keep going. You were here when I needed you most." She looked down at her daughter, perfect and pink and squalling. "What should I name her?" Jacob thought of his own Mary, of Catherine, of all the women in his life who'd shaped him, taught him, loved him. "Grace," he said, "because she's a gift you didn't expect, a grace you didn't earn, but received anyway." Sarah smiled. "Grace. Yes, Grace Catherine Brennan." The middle name hit Jacob like a physical blow. "You don't have to." "I want to. Your wife helped bring her into the world in a way, through you, through the love that still lives in you because of her." Jacob gently lifted baby Grace from Sarah's arms and carried her to the cradle he'd made. The cradle built with his daughter's tools, meant to honor her memory. He laid Grace down carefully, tucking the blankets around her small form. The baby settled, her crying easing to soft whimpers. Jacob stood there, looking down at this new life, and felt something break open in his chest. All the grief, all the loss, all the years of isolation, they didn't disappear, but they transformed into something else, something that felt like hope. He'd helped bring life into the world. After so much death, so much darkness, he'd been part of creating something beautiful and new. It felt like redemption, like a second chance, like coming home. 2 weeks passed in a blur of sleepless nights and unexpected joy. Baby Grace was healthy, strong-lunged, and demanding. Sarah recovered slowly but well. Jacob's shoulder healed, though it would never be quite the same. He didn't mind. Scars were just proof you'd survived something worth surviving. No more bounty hunters came. A week after Grace's birth, a rider appeared. Not a threat, but a federal marshal from Denver. He'd heard about the shooting, investigated the claims against Sarah, and discovered the truth. Robert Hendricks was wanted now, charged with fraud, attempted assault, and conspiracy to commit murder. The man had fled, his claims seized by the territorial government. "The silver vein's legally yours, Mrs. Brennan," the marshal said. "Worth a small fortune from what the assayers say." Sarah looked at Jacob when the marshal left. "I'm rich. I can go anywhere, do anything. What do you want to do?" She looked around the cabin, at Grace sleeping in the cradle, at Jacob mending harness by the fire, at the simple, solid life they'd built together in these few weeks. "I don't know yet, but I know I'm not leaving, not right away." Spring came slowly to the mountains. The snow melted in patches, revealing new grass underneath. Birds returned, filling the air with song. The world was waking up, and so was Jacob. He and Sarah fell into a comfortable routine. She cared for Grace while Jacob tended the animals and began preparing for spring planting. They took meals together, talked long into the evenings, shared the work of daily life. It wasn't romance. Both of them were too marked by loss for that. But it was partnership. Family of a kind. Jacob found himself laughing again. Really laughing, not just polite chuckles. Sarah had a dry wit that caught him off guard, and Grace's antics, the faces she made, the sounds, were endlessly amusing. One evening, as they sat by the fire with Grace between them, Sarah said, "I've been thinking about the future." "What about it?" "The claim is worth enough that I could buy property, build something. I was thinking maybe here in these mountains, a larger house, a real home." Jacob felt his heart skip. "You want to stay?" "If you'll have us. I know this is your place, your sanctuary. But it feels like home now. The only place that's felt like home since Thomas died." "I'd like that," Jacob said quietly. "I'd like that very much." "And I was thinking," Sarah continued, "about that carpentry skill of yours going to waste. With the money from the claim, we could start a business. Custom furniture, maybe. Your work is beautiful, Jacob. People would pay well for it. I'm an old man. You're 53. You've got good years ahead of you. Why waste them hiding?" She was right, of course. She was usually right. Jacob looked at Grace, sleeping peacefully in the cradle he'd made. The cradle that had become a symbol of something larger, the possibility of new beginnings, of life after loss. "All right," he said. "Let's build something. Together." The plans took shape over the following weeks. Sarah would buy land adjacent to Jacob's claim. They'd build a larger house, a proper workshop. Start small, selling to mining towns and settlements. Build a reputation for quality, but more than the business plans, more than the practical details, they were building something else. A family, unconventional and born of tragedy, but real nonetheless. Jacob found himself thinking less about what he'd lost and more about what he'd found. Catherine and Mary would always be part of him. The locket still hung around his neck. The photograph still sat on the mantel. But they no longer defined him. He was more than his grief. He was Jacob Frost, carpenter and mountain man. Guardian to a woman and child who'd stumbled into his life and changed everything. Builder of cradles and futures. A man who'd been given a second chance and chosen to take it. One evening in late spring, with wildflowers blooming across the meadows and Grace nearly 3 months old, Sarah asked Jacob to read from the Bible again. He did, choosing passages about renewal and redemption, about deserts blooming and broken things made whole. When he finished, Sarah said, "Do you still think God wasn't listening when you prayed for Catherine and Mary?" Jacob considered the question carefully. "I don't know. Maybe he was listening and the answer was no. Maybe there are things beyond our understanding, but I know this. When you prayed in that barn, freezing to death, something brought me out into that storm. Call it God, call it chance, call it whatever you want. But I found you, and finding you saved me as much as it saved you. So you believe again?" "I believe in second chances. I believe in the possibility of a hope even in the darkest places. I believe that love doesn't end with death. It transforms, continues in different ways." He looked at Grace, at Sarah, at the life growing around him. Maybe that's enough. That night, after Sarah and Grace had gone to sleep, Jacob stepped outside. The stars were brilliant, the mountain air crisp and clean. He thought about the man he'd been, broken, isolated, waiting to die, and the man he was becoming, whole, connected, alive. He thought about Catherine's last words to him. "Don't stop living." He hadn't understood them then, had thought she meant just survive. But now he knew better. She'd meant live fully, love again, find purpose and joy and meaning. He was doing that now, finally. Jacob looked up at the stars, the same stars that had witnessed his grief, his isolation, his slow death of spirit. "I'm living," he said quietly, speaking to Catherine, to Mary, to the universe itself. "I'm really living again, and I'm going to make you proud." The mountains held their peace, but Jacob felt something like approval in the silence, like a blessing on this new chapter of his life. Inside, a baby stirred. Sarah murmured softly, soothing her. Jacob smiled and went back in, closing the door on the cold night and stepping into the warmth of home. The cradle rocked gently in the firelight, and in it, new life slept peacefully. The past and future, loss and hope, grief and joy, all of it woven together in this small cabin in the mountains. Sometimes the greatest gifts arrive in our darkest moments. Sometimes redemption comes wrapped in unexpected packages. Sometimes all it takes is being willing to open the door when someone knocks, to step into the storm when every instinct says stay safe, to choose life when death seems easier. Jacob Frost had made that choice, and in choosing life, he'd found something worth living for. Grace yawned, her tiny fists waving. Sarah laughed softly. Jacob sat beside them, his family, and felt at peace for the first time in 15 years. The mountains stood eternal around them, sheltering this small miracle of renewal. And in the cradle built with love and old tools, new hope rocked gently, dreaming of tomorrow.